Well, welcome back to Shattered Lives. I'm joined as always by Michael O'Toole. How's it going, Michael?
Grand Paul, how's you?
Good. This was a busy week for us.
As ever.
As ever, yes, that's part of the job. Not complaining. Busy is good, and in fairness, we're not Guardian. We're not the ones doing the real job. So where do we just have the pleasure of covering it?
And you and I have both suffered this in recent weeks. When there is nothing happening, it is horrendous. We call it Deadsville. It is brutal. So at least we're busy.
We are busy, and to be fair, really busy over the course of the weekend just gone. This is a difficult event for us to cover, but nonetheless, we have covered it as best we could and in as much detail as we could. We haven't held back on any particular details. There's no conspiracy, and we'll happily talk about it here now. A very tragic incident that is now a murder investigation. A young man by the name of Quaham Babatunde, he's 34 years of age and he's from Nigeria, was stabbed to death in South Anne Street there in the centre of Dublin, just off Grafton Street at around 3 a.m. on Saturday morning. And what we know now about the incident is that Guardia have launched a murder investigation, and when we initially covered this, they were searching for suspects. There was another man injured in hospital, and a number of people have since been arrested, and 2 people have been before the court. So as of today, another individual has been charged and appeared in court accused of assault causing harm and violent disorder, as has another individual. And there is a third person who was arrested in the north in Belfast by the PSNI, and he remains in custody.
And that person was arrested at the ferry port in Belfast. It seems he was heading over to Liverpool.
Yeah, Guardia had intelligence that this person had perhaps fled across the border, and they feared that this person was trying to leave the jurisdiction effectively, and he was arrested en route to a ferry going to Liverpool. He's a 23-year-old man, and he is the chief suspect in this murder investigation. So he's currently in the custody of the PSNI, and they've extended his detention as of the recording of this podcast.
And the 2 men who have been charged have not been charged with murder, but they have been charged in Dublin, effectively, where the alleged offence happened.
Yeah, so I was in the court appearance yesterday for Jeffrey Banku. He's a 21-year-old man from Cardy Rock Crescent in Balbriggan, and he's charged with Section 3 assault causing harm to Quaham Babatunde and to another man, and violent disorder and production of a knife during the alleged incident in South Anne Street. And then another individual is before the courts today, and he is also similarly charged. His name is Ross Carr, and he's 21 years of age. He's from Sea Point Lane in Balbriggan, and he is accused of assaulting Mr. Babatunde at the scene, and he has been remanded into custody, as has the other individual. They've made no reply after caution. So neither of those individuals are charged with the murder of Quaham Babatunde, and this third individual, as we said, is still in the custody of the PSNI. But there have been plenty of twists and turns in this investigation already.
Let's talk about the northern aspect of this. Obviously, the Guardia jurisdiction stops north of Dundalk and west of Buncrana, or east of Buncrana. So obviously the north is not in the Garda's jurisdiction, but it was interesting that this man was arrested by the PSNI investigating the murder of Mr. Babatunde in the Republic. So we touched on this before, but it might be worth explaining it again. There are cross-border agreements. I think it's called the Criminal Jurisdiction Act 1976. Basically, it was set up during the Troubles so that people who were suspected of committing offences in the Republic could be charged and prosecuted up north, and vice versa. So there is precedent for this if a decision is made by the PSNI, and it will be a PSNI investigation with assistance from Guardia, but there is precedence for this. Maybe about 20 years ago, there was a lady in Walkinstown called Georgina Eager. I think we spoke about this before, Paul. She was murdered in Walkinstown, and the suspect went over to Britain. So normally one thing that can happen is if the DPP directs Guardia to charge someone, Guardia can apply for extradition from the North or from Britain. But they also have this Criminal Jurisdiction Act whereby the person can be charged in the other jurisdiction for an offence committed in Ireland, or vice versa. You can be charged in Ireland for an offence committed in England, in Britain. So in the case of Georgina Eager, the man was charged in England and he went on trial in the Old Bailey in London, and he was subsequently convicted of murder. So there is precedent for this, and there is another case. I won't go into too many details of it, but there is a man up north who is currently awaiting trial for a murder allegedly committed in Limerick around 18 months ago. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to mention the details, but it's a quirk, I think, of the conflict in the 70s, because there were older listeners will remember there were a whole series of problems about extradition and everything during this. People, managed to fight extradition from the Republic to the North and to Britain. So one of the things they did to get around that was that you could be charged in the Republic with an offence committed up north and vice versa. And so that law is still statute, and it can and may be used in this case. But I just thought it's interesting that can happen. I think it's one of the few jurisdictions in the world where that can happen.
Yeah, and I just want to note that the PSNI have said that this person who's been arrested is arrested on suspicion of murder. So that is a difference in relation to the other two individuals who've been charged with assault and with violent disorder. This person is arrested currently on suspicion of the murder of Quaham Babatunde. Speaking of Mr. Babatunde, we should give you some information about him. He is obviously the victim of a crime and an alleged murder. But nonetheless, there are some disturbing factors about him as well, and about his past. And we immediately had people getting onto us straight away, the usual armchair detectives. But in fairness, people are doing their homework, they're Googling, and they're seeing things. And yes, if you put Mr. Babatunde's name into Google and you search internationally, you will find stories from Italy where he was accused of rape. But we have a higher standard when it comes to reporting things. We need more than just, reading something on the internet. We have, and I'm not trying to sound patronizing to people, but that's just part and parcel of the job. We all saw those reports, but we had to do a bit of digging, a bit of investigating in order to prove those reports that the same individual was Mr. Babatunde.
Let's be honest about this, Paul. If somebody puts two and two together and gets five on the internet, they're not going to get sued.
Yes.
If you and I put two and two together on the internet, we're going to be down in the forecourts. So
absolutely,
you're right. We're not patronising. We're just saying we have higher hurdles. Rightfully, we have higher hurdles to clear. But we got there in the end. You got there in the end on Sunday night. Was it Sunday night or Monday night?
Was it Sunday? I can't even remember at this stage. It has been a bit of a blur. No, look, I was lucky enough to break the story, and I felt it was an important story to break. Look, I mean, if it was true or not, it was up to us to. It had spread so much that I felt obliged as a journalist to either, report accurately that yes, he is the same individual, or debunk it. No, they're different people. And look, they were of similar age, of similar nationality, of similar appearance. But you have to be careful about these things. You don't want to wrongly identify somebody. And I was checking with various sources, and indeed, look, we know that Guardia were aware of this, but it wasn't on the high priority list for them. They were investigating Mr. Babatunde's murder, and his past, so to speak, was not as relevant to Guardia. So we weren't getting a definitive answer on that. And the only way I really got around this was I ended up speaking to people who knew Mr. Babatunde, friends of his, and one of them did reluctantly, through others, confirmed to me that, look, yes, he's the same individual. He lived in Italy. Here's a picture of him, and the picture was almost identical to the mugshot that was put out by the Italian authorities. But they were very much defending Mr. Babatunde, saying, look, he was accused of this. He denied it, and he's innocent of it, is what they were saying. But they saw the relevance of reporting it ultimately, and we did. And
let's get into the make no apologies phase here.
Yeah,
I mentioned this in our last pod, the face-to-face one in Stony Batter. We're not here to censor the news. We're there to print what news we can, or publish what news we can. It is a fact he was an asylum seeker. It is a fact he was a Nigerian national, and it is a fact he was charged with rape. Some people of either hue may not be overly impressed that we write those facts, but they're facts and they're news. So we can't really go, again, I don't know what your agenda is. I don't know what my agenda is. Hopefully it's just that we're just hacks. We break stories. So that's it. And people don't get that.
No, people don't get that. I have no agenda other than to report the facts. And if it's factually true that this victim was accused of and appeared in court for rape, then it's up to us. We have a duty to report that, and report that we did. And just to give you some of those facts, from what we could establish, Mr. Babatunde lived in Italy. He was a footballer and played football in Italy, and he was accused of raping a woman who he was out on a night out with, and ultimately brought back to the place that he was residing and raped her. That was the allegation, when she was asleep multiple times. He appeared in court over that and denied it and said that it was consensual. After that, it gets a bit grey, because the Italian system obviously is different to our own, and maybe you can speak to this, but it appears by all accounts what his friends were saying and what the reports say is accurate to a point where we know he was accused of it, charged, and appeared in court with it. Then it appears as though he was given bail. And the matter mustn't either have been dealt with in terms of being reported, or it actually wasn't dealt with at all, because the next incident that is reported is in 2019 when Mr. Babatunde was stopped at a traffic stop with a friend, and it was determined that he didn't have a license. And on the basis of that and of reports saying that he had a charge for rape, deportation proceedings began. And the next we hear of Mr. Babatunde, he's been murdered in the street in South Ann Street, having lived in an iPass centre here in Ballyogan. So there are questions there as to how he got here. Yes,
but I do think it's fair. I think reading the Italian media reports, they did say he'd been deported or expelled.
So the Italian reports do say that Mr. Babatunde was deported as a result of the traffic stop in 2019. But beyond that, we don't really have a lot of information, and maybe this isn't where our crime report question for other reporters, political perhaps. He ended up here. He ended up living in an iPass centre in Ballyogan, and he was, by all accounts, an asylum seeker here. As to why his, rape charge did not come up, wasn't flagged by the authorities, those are genuine questions people have. There's a gap in time between that 2019 deportation and him ending up on South Ann Street being murdered.
Yes, and the only information we really have about Italy is from Italian media reports. And so you're right, one was in 2018 about him being charged, and I think there was media publicity about it because he was a Nigerian footballer.
Yes, and a promising one apparently.
Yes. Yeah. So then obviously you'll know that I speak Italian, so I went and looked at the Italian reports, and the next one there is about him was in 2019, and it's right that he was stopped at a traffic stop. But the other interesting aspect, and we were sort of trying to rack our brains about this, it said he went into custody on a sort of preventative custody. I think that's akin to remand here. There are various steps that you have to be, obviously they're big into not releasing people or not keeping people in prison in Italy. So there are formal steps, and one is that you have to be a threat to the public, and there were 3 or 4 steps, and they decided he meted the criteria for him to be put into custody. But then you're right, the trail does go cold until 2019. He stopped at a traffic stop. Now, the only thing is there was no mention really of how the court case went, so it may have been dropped. But I do know Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, got into a bit of doo-doo a couple of weeks ago because she ordered the deportation of somebody totally unconnected to this. I think it was about terrorism or something. But there is a way that Italian authorities can deport someone without a conviction, and they sort of have to agree to go. But we don't know. I'm only speculating. But the media reports were definitive. That man was expelled in 2019 from Italy, and then he ends up here.
Yeah, and I think there are genuine questions to be asked there, just in terms of, people often raise this issue. I think where they go a bit further, that's where you enter into that far right territory when you're talking about people of particular nationalities. But people are entitled to ask questions in regards to, how people end up in iPass centres here, and do they go through proper checks? And I know that Guardia, very senior Guardia, have assured that there effectively is no such thing as an unvetted migrant, that every migrant that comes in here is vetted to a degree. It's not clear what happened with Quaham Babatunde in terms of whether he was actually convicted of rape it's not clear. As you say, he may well have been, based on the reports we're reading, he may well have been deported before that or ever got anywhere. So perhaps that might explain why that wasn't flagged up in the system, so to speak.
I don't know, Paul.
We don't know.
I would find it, I would be incredulous that if he used his own passport to come in here, I'd be incredulous that there's not evidence or information or intelligence, whatever you want to call it, linked to that passport. And then there's the other question of, if you're charged with an offence in Italy and you're deported, how can you come to another EU country and claim asylum?
Well, those are questions that need to be answered. I mean, they're legitimate questions to ask. And I think people are concerned in general about that particular system. And they have right to ask questions in regards to that. And also, have to be careful here, because now there are people who are before the courts. But certainly the individual who is in Belfast had been on bail here for another alleged offence. So there are serious questions about that as well, about how our system treats people who have been accused of serious offences like possession of a knife or drugs, and then they're out and about on the streets and able to commit further crimes.
The only thing I'll say about that, Paul, speaking generally, if bail, the guards object to bail a lot of times, and they do, and they have reasons to object to bail. But being realistic, if more people were remanded in custody, the jails would be bursting. And
they already are.
They already are. Yeah. I mean, that's the reality. And again, I mean, how many bail hearings have you been at? And I've been at where the defence barrister said, look, the accused has a constitutional right to be viewed as innocent until proven guilty. And that's one of the reasons why they always fight to get their clients out. But if you'd probably be talking 600 or 700 extra people in the prison system every day, and it just can't cope with that.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the new minister is talking about looking at the bail system, and he has also spoken about the fact that the government have already increased the sentencing, for example, on knife crimes. So the government does say that it is taking issues like this more seriously. But you're right, we can't lock up every single person who is accused of a crime, or the jails would be completely full, and they already kind of are to a degree.
I'll make one last point to Mr. Babatunde that just come to my mind. It could be that he didn't claim asylum in Italy. He was just living there, and maybe he got what they call a permesso di soggiorno, a residence permit, and maybe he left and then came, whatever happened in the ensuing time. We don't know how long he was here, do we?
According to his friends, and I think the IPAS have said that he has been in their system for about a year.
Okay, so between 2019, when he was kicked out of Italy, and 2024, 2023, maybe something happened in Nigeria and he felt he had to deflate. We don't know. I'm just making that point that there may have been a reason.
Well, look, all of those factors aside, we're crime reporters and we need to talk about the crime itself. And the crime is a murder. A man was stabbed to death in the street of Dublin. And let's be honest, to a certain degree, this is getting even more publicity and attention because of where it happened. Because it happened in the south side of the city. And I think to a certain extent that's really shocked people, that a very popular and bustling area, you've got Keogh's pub there, lots of popular shops and restaurants, and you've got violent knife crime happening there. And so it's got a lot of attention as a result of that too. But I'm just curious.
I'm going to rant. I can feel my working class hair coming out and my anger. You're right.
This bothers me. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You and I are working class kids, right? We're doing well, but we're working class kids. And say what you want about the Star and the Mirror. We put every murder on the front page, whether it's Ballybock or Foxrock. It doesn't bother, right? There is, unfortunately, an element of, oh my God, how can a crime like this happen in nice South Dublin elsewhere? And that's not right, because every human life counts.
Yeah, I agree. And we will try our best to cover everything objectively. And that's why I think maybe people, it's up to them to make editorial decisions. Maybe some people ran away from this particular aspect of the story because they felt maybe it riled up one particular section of society. It's not up to us to get into that. If anything, it kind of pushed me even further. The amount of people that were getting onto me saying, you're ignoring this. It's like, no, I'm not ignoring it. I'm just trying to fact check it first before I report it. That's what we do. That's journalism. That's the job. and we'll continue to do that. But I was going to ask you the question just on the basis of this particular crime and other knife crimes like it, because I know you're a man for stats. You know, I know that the homicide rate has not gone up as such, but has knife crime gone up? Do the stats actually back that? You know, there's certainly anecdotally more knife crime happening. And even I'm only asking this because I even heard the Taoiseach say in the Dáil yesterday that knife crime, people carrying knives, bringing knives to social events, is a recent phenomenon that the government and our own system is trying to come to terms with.
I thought the video, it has been verified that video was from South Ann Street, wasn't it? The man with I thought that was very troubling.
It's terrifying.
It's not something I've really seen. Now, maybe it's the advent of social media, but it's not something I've really seen in Ireland before. The answer is I don't know. I do keep a lookout. I do keep all the homicides every year, and I'm just trying to rack my head. I think last year in all of Ireland, and I'll have to double check this, but there were more people victims of knife crime than assaults. And it was usually the other way around, because it is. But I'll have to go back and double check, and I'll have it in the next pod, because I've got the stats for the last 5 years of every method of death, shall we say? And I'll check that out, and I'll come back in the next pod, and we'll have those stats.
Yeah, but I just wonder in general, you know, do people feel? I think people do feel that Dublin is more unsafe, and I remember the previous Justice Minister saying Dublin is safe. I know this particular Justice Minister does not say that. You know, certain parts of Dublin are certainly not safe, but to see an incident like this happen in the south of the city, it seems to have spurred on a reaction where maybe there wouldn't have been had it been, say, on Talbot Street. And I think that's a shame. And
that really winds my gears, because Talbot Street is just important as South Ann Street. I'm sorry, it is. It's part of our great capital. And crime there is just as important as crime on South Ann Street. And the victims are just as important. And anyway, Talbot Street's a great place.
So the next topic we want to discuss is about the biggest, I suppose, seizure of drugs in the history of the state. And finally, we have a conclusion to a certain extent to this massive case. Over 150 million euro worth of drugs seized from, although Mick is going to explain why it's possibly more than that really, on the MV Matthew. And 2 people have pleaded guilty. So tell us a bit about this, Mick.
Right. First of all, the biggest seizure. Okay. It is the biggest seizure by weight. It was 2,253.
This is where you get your anorak on, okay.
Yes, because I was looking at this and people were going, the biggest seizure ever. I remember there were 2 massive ones, Dancing with Waves and another called Operation Seabite. Now, they were worth more because of different values throughout the years. There were about 800 million, right? Massive seizures, but they weighed less. So this is the biggest in the context of the heaviest seizure of cocaine. Okay, so yes, it was 26th of September 2023. Army Ranger Wing fast roped down from an AW139 helicopter and seized this MV Matthew ship. Now, at the press conference, the guards and customs, who are the two main anti-drugs units really in Ireland, valued it at 157 million. I took slight issue with this, and they sort of accepted this. So the way it works is the guards and customs value every kilo of cocaine at 70,000 euro. Okay, so 2,253 is 157 million. That does not take into account the fact that when cocaine reaches land or its final destination, it is cut. Okay, so it could be 80% pure. So for every kilo of cocaine that is smuggled into Ireland or smuggled into Europe, you get 3 kilos on the streets. Okay, so it goes down to 30% purity or whatever, but you get more out of it. You put lignocaine and whatever, anything to bulk it up, to cut it or dilute it. So I put this to the customs at the press conference with Commissioner Justin Kelly at the time. And I said, really, are you not talking about 470, 480 million? And he said, well, we accept that it could be double or treble on the streets. So I always look at it on the streets. So I accept 157 million by weight, but pure cocaine is always, more than always, diluted, and or other words, cut. So it's really, for me, it's about 480, 500 million, which is a lot of cocaine.
That is a lot of dough. I mean, it's easy to undersell just like how dramatic the operation was. If people can remember the videos and images that happened showing this helicopter and the ship, and just the massive operation that went into seizing these drugs, and the intelligence that must have led to that has been incredible. But you have a story today, and I think it's important to highlight this fact that that these drugs can be linked back to the Kinahan cartel.
A few days after the seizure, we broke that Guardia believed the Kinahans were involved in it, not as selling it. The Kinahans don't really sell drugs in Ireland anymore. There's a group called the Family, and even they've, I think, have had a bit of a battering from the guards in the last year or so. So there are several other groups, and which is, we might even discuss in another pod about the new and upcoming gangs who are filling the vacuum.
Taking over. Yeah.
But what the Kinahans really do specialise in is financing and acting as link men and having relations with the cartels in Colombia and Peru and who make the cocaine. So Guardia Intelligence believed, and we wrote it at the time, that the Kinahans' fingerprints were over the organisation and the transaction itself, whereas there could have been maybe half a dozen gangs who were involved in it themselves, but they would have used the Kinahans' expertise. Now, if you'll notice, there was evidence given that Dubai, where the Kinahans are, featured prominently in what evidence there was in this. We know that the Castlemore, the sort of the daughter ship, that the plan was for the MV Matthew to transfer the drugs to, and then they'd be brought ashore. That was bought by a company that had links to Dubai, and then the MV Matthew was renamed, and it was bought and renamed by a company heavily linked to Dubai. So, there is significant evidence pointing towards Dubai, and in that regard, I think that's why the guards believed and still do believe that there's a Kinahan involvement in the overarching plot to bring the drugs in.
The two individuals who pleaded guilty in relation to this, an Iranian national, Saeed Hassani, he's 39, and a 31-year-old Filipino man by the name of Harold Estona. So they've pleaded guilty to possession of cocaine for sale or supply on board the MV Matthew. So they're the last of 8 people that were charged in relation to this to plead guilty. 6 co-accused previously entered pleas before the trial. So it spares the state a lengthy trial, doesn't it?
Yes, it was a bit strange because they were all arraigned together, and 2 of them decided not to plead guilty 3 weeks ago, and we thought, okay, we're going to have a trial. So then the trial starts, and then they plead guilty. But that's their right. I will say, Paul, looking back, this was a very good operation by the Army Ranger Wing, the Naval Service, Doc B, and Customs.
Yeah.
But that's only with the benefit of hindsight. I think this was a very, very difficult mission to organise, and it could easily have gone wrong. For example, just one scenario: the Army Ranger Wing were brought in by helicopter, had the fast rope down. Just say the people in the ship had guns and started firing at them as they were abseiling. They've been really, really in a sticky position. Even the very act, technically, you don't just fly a helicopter and Bob's your uncle. It takes huge skill to fly a helicopter at that speed and make it that the personnel can drop down. Even getting onto the ship, even controlling the bridge, that was their first task, to control the bridge. But then they saw they were trying to set fire to a lifeboat with the drugs. So there were a lot of things happening. It looks easy, but I think it's testament to the training that the Army Ranger Wing do on a daily basis. This was a tough operation, and they made it look easy, I think.
An incredibly dramatic operation, and thankfully, nobody was harmed. I'm curious, just as I'm thinking, obviously this, is believed to have been linked to the Kinahans, at the time, and subsequently we've heard very senior Gardaí say that the Kinahans' influence here has significantly waned, and they're no longer the biggest gang in operating in Ireland. I wonder, was the MV Matthew, I suppose, the final nail in the coffin for them getting drugs into this country, or are the Kinahans still supplying a lot of drugs into this country? That was a massive blow to the Kinahan cartel.
It was, but it was also a massive blow to the gangs who would have been directly making money from it. Look, yes. The Kinahans, their attitude has changed, and they are taking more of a backseat, but still, very, very powerful.
Well, they're the only gang probably with the means to bring drugs in on a shipment like that, on that kind of scale.
Well, they would be one of the few international gangs who would have international contacts in Colombia to that level. So, look, they don't have street dealers anymore. There are other people who fill that, and there are other people who fill the cocaine market in Ireland. But the Kinahans, look, they're a massive organisation. They're worth £1.5 billion. They have contacts all over. We know they're active in Australia. We know that they have people in South America. So, look, maybe their attitude has changed, but they haven't moved away from crime. But they're just at a much higher level than the average gang.
I'm just curious about the sentencing of these individuals. Obviously they pleaded to possession for sale of supply, but this is unique. And normally you would think it wouldn't get a massive sentence for something like that. But this is a unique set of circumstances and a very serious amount of drugs. So I'm curious what you think. What kind of sentencing we'd be talking about for these guys?
Okay, so we have a bit of leeway because this is the special criminal court, and I think it's Judge Melanie Greeley is the presiding judge, and there's a mention next week to set a sentencing date. Could be a couple of months. It's up to the judges, of course, but I think they're looking at a lot. Some of them say, the captain and people who were sent on. There was this WhatsApp group where we were talking about 2.2 tons and moving and setting stuff on fire and everything. That shows central involvement in the plot. So those people, I think, would not be shocked to get a significant jail term. I mentioned at the top of the show there were other massive seizures, and from memory, I think somebody got 20 or 30 years for that. And we also have to think, say, John Gilligan, he was convicted of importing millions of euro worth of pounds, I think at the time, of cannabis. Didn't he get 28 years?
He did. Yeah.
So, it's the limit is over €13,000, £13,000. But this is no ordinary Section 15A case. So for me, they're looking at significant jail time.
That's going to be a very interesting sentence, and so because to a certain extent they have to send a message, don't they, that this sort of thing won't stand. So it'll be interesting.
They call it deterrence. The judges talk about deterrence, and they the judicial view would be we have to deter others from doing this. So look, they're in trouble. I put it that way.
Okay, we'll definitely be talking about that again. Well, the last kind of major topic we want to talk about is a bit complicated, but we'll talk about it where we can. But it is also hugely significant. There has been for some time a very dangerous and volatile feud in West Dublin, which culminated in a murder which I cannot believe is over. We're into the second year now of since it happened, but people will remember a horrific shooting incident in Brown's Steakhouse in Blanchardstown on Christmas Eve 2023. And two men died as a result of that incident, one being Tristan Sherry and the other being Jason Hennessy Sr. Mr. Hennessy Sr. was shot by Tristan Sherry and later died a couple of days later in hospital.
I think it was more than a week later, wasn't it?
More than a week later, yes. Yeah.
In the matter.
And Tristan Sherry was the gunman, and he was violently murdered in the Steakhouse by associates of the late Mr. Hennessy Sr. And this week, those individuals have been found guilty in what has been a lengthy trial process. And so those individuals are all finally sentenced or to be sentenced in relation to this, and it marks the end of a very lengthy investigation. But the feud as such, I want to talk. I'll talk about the court appearances first, actually, just to be. But I will come back to the feud. The feud as such is still very much active. But I just want to name these individuals: Michael Andricut, he's 23 years of age; 18-year-old Noah Mussini, 19-year-old David Amah. They all pleaded not guilty to the charge of murdering Mr. Sherry, but they were ultimately found guilty. And then three others, 19-year-old Jonas Kabungu, 18-year-old Dermot O'Brien, and 21-year-old Brandon Hennessy were convicted of offences relating to the murder. And a seventh man, Juarez Kumbu, removed the actual firearm used in the incident from the scene. And he's pleaded guilty, but he's to appear in court next month. this was a very violent incident in which Tristan Sherry obviously came in and fired the shots that fatally injured Jason Hennessy Sr. But he was then immediately pinned to the ground by Mr. Hennessy Sr. And then these other individuals all got involved, and he was disarmed, kicked, stamped on, struck with chairs, stabbed, shot in the shoulder, then with his own weapon. And the post-mortem determined that he had 27 sharp wound injuries, 16 of which were stab wounds, and he was beaten several times in the head and face with chairs, a brush, a metal bar. So he was very, 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 very violently murdered. And you may remember, Mick, that there was actually footage of this. There were photographs taken of Mr. Sherry on the ground after he had been brutally murdered. It was a violent, violent scene, but all of these individuals admitted that they did kill Mr. Sherry and they had involvement in the incident, but they were citing effectively self-defense, that this guy was a gunman. He came in and shot up the place, and that they reacted the way that they did. But the judges ultimately decided that no, and this was a special criminal court case, the judges decided that the violence was unduly too violent, effectively, and that it did meet the threshold for murder, as opposed to, say, being manslaughter, self-defense. And so they have all been found guilty. But it was a violent, violent crime. But it is complicated. Tristan Sherry did go into that pub that day to carry out a murder with another individual who is still yet to be arrested. So it's complicated, but these are all criminals, serious criminals at that, who, if you only look at the gravity of the violence that they carried out on Tristan Sherry to see that they are capable of that. So it marks the end of a very long Garda investigation. But it's still going on because there is another individual still at large. And that feud, as I mentioned, is still going on to this day. And
do you think, obviously there's another feud in what's called the K, and that got a lot of attention. Do you think we give, I'm talking the media in general, did we give enough attention to this feud? Because it did go under the surface for a good long while.
I think we did cover it, to be fair, and it was only towards... There was an increase in incidents leading up to the Brown Steakhouse incident, but even still, I think the Brown Steakhouse incident caught us all by surprise, just the level of depravity that went into it. And, you know, I think there were other individuals targeted that day as well by Tristan Sherry. Okay, Jason Hennessy Sr. was the person who was shot and killed, but there were other individuals being targeted as well. And, you know, I think that shocked the country because there were plenty of families just in there enjoying their Christmas dinner, Christmas Eve, and a mad gunman comes in and starts spraying up the place. It showed you that a feud had obviously gotten to the level where someone had such a personal grudge. Tristan Sherry had such a personal grudge against Hennessy and his associates that he was willing to go into that bar that day and carry out that crime. So I think that raised all of our attention then as crime reporters to go, there is a very serious and personal feud here. I'll be honest, when I first heard that Tristan Sherry was the victim, I didn't immediately know the name. Now, I did a bit of digging and I found out obviously he'd been before the courts and he was known to Guardia and had previously associated with the Hennessys and had fallen out with them and would have been associated with the gangster that we call Mr. Flashy, and obviously we've reported on him extensively. But this is a very long-winded way of saying no. I don't think we covered it really as much until that Brown Steakhouse incident, and then we started digging into it a bit more and asking our sources about what exactly led to Tristan Sherry going into that pub that day to carry out such a violent and heinous crime.
I would agree with you, but I in our defence, in media's defence, there are plenty of criminals and plenty of gangs who are completely beneath the radar that we don't hear about, we don't know about even. And it's only if something happens, you go to contact and go, who's this fella? And but now, one argument I would say is that the Kinahans took up so much of our time and attention because there were so many aspects to it. But then there was the Finglas feud, and that was really heavy as well. But there are criminals who are completely beneath the radar, who don't come to our attention at all because they don't get involved and they just go and make money.
Yeah, and to be fair, again, let's be honest, some of these criminals that are involved in this feud, we've known about them and been writing about them for some time. But and this isn't to say that they're not serious criminals. They obviously are, and they're capable of incredible violence. But they wouldn't be, say, the sharpest tools in the shed, right? And to a certain extent, we might have dismissed some of their actions as being, well, that's just the type of criminal that they are. But clearly, they became embroiled in a very personal dispute that has spilled out into now murder and multiple attempts since to murder one another. There is another individual who has been suspected of involvement in this Brown Steakhouse incident, who has an association with Mr. Flashy, who has been targeted by associates of the late Jason Hennessy Sr. multiple times, and vice versa. So the violence has continued. Even this week, a house was set on fire, I believe, of an innocent family, but associates of Mr. Hennessy were targeted in that. So there continue to be petrol bomb fire attacks, even in the midst of this matter being resolved in the courts. There are still people carrying out violence on the streets. The feud is still very personal. And I know Guardia would say that that they've done quite well in the face of really quite thuggish individuals who have no regard for the law, who don't care. Like, these are the types of criminals that just, this is all a big joke to them, and they live in another world to you and I. And when they are before the courts, it's just a day out for them, and violence means absolutely nothing to them. And that's why, the likes of David Ama and Noah Mussini and yes, okay, you can argue Tristan Sherry came in with that gun that day, but he was tackled to the ground and he never got back up again. And yes, they carried out senseless and I think unwarranted violence against him. They just unleashed on him in a violent way that normal people would not react. And it shows you the type of individuals that these scumbags are.
Violence is their friend, and they're used to violence, and most people aren't. That's it.
Sadly, and as I said, this feud still goes on, and there are still people being brought before the courts. And I think Guardia have done incredibly well. It made a lot of successful moves against these gangs since the Brown Steakhouse incident. To be fair, they have saved, I think, a lot of lives. That incident shocked everybody, but we're very lucky not to be talking about further murders in this, and hopefully there won't be. And finally, Mick, we'll finish up on your bizarre and very interesting story about a Garda trainee. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's you ever get a story, somebody tells you about it and you go, that can't be true. That just cannot be true. And then it's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so the way it works, you join the Guards and you become a Garda trainee. You spend some time at Garda College in Templemore, and then you're sent out. It used to be phase 1, 2 and 3 and 4. Slightly changed now, but anyway, after a while you have to go out on the street. Okay, so I can't say where it was because there's only a small number of Garda trainees in that area. But essentially what happened was this Garda trainee was what they call at an IP's house, an injured party's house, taking a statement. The person had been a victim of crime. And after the guard left, the person noticed that his wallet was missing. Now, he had a tracker, one of those Apple things?
Yeah.
One of them. I think it was one
AirTag.
of the other trackers are AirTag. Other trackers are available, but let's say it was an AirTag. And it was on the wallet. So they tracked it down, and as a result of that being tracked down, this trainee Garda was arrested on suspicion of theft. So the allegation would be is that he stole the wallet from the injured party's house or injured party's property, skedoodled, and then was caught. So he was arrested. The investigation's ongoing, but he was arrested and detained and questioned. Released without charge. There will be a file to the DPP and that sort of thing. But it is pretty shocking that allegedly a Garda trainee would decide to take a wallet from an injured party's house.
It's interesting. And it's another example of debunking that we don't cover certain topics. You've been accused over the years of being a Garda shill and Garda friendly. Well, look, we have no problem covering when Gardaí mess up as well. So
I think there have been very few media outlets that have covered as many cases like this that we have. Remember about the Garda allegedly harassing another guard with a banana?
Yeah, that's a great story.
A few weeks ago, I did a story about a female Garda in the southeast arrested for allegedly harassing another member of the force. So, when these stories come our way, we do them. And let's be honest, guards aren't exactly angry when we do stories like this. I've never had somebody say, "What are you doing? Leave that guard alone." There's no pity for them.
Yeah, exactly. It's an embarrassment to them that others would behave that way, and they're happy to have it highlighted most of the time.
And it is guards who arrest them.
Exactly. News is news, and we're not afraid to report it.
News is news.
When it's true, we don't just read it on the internet, on social media, and assume it's true. So, thank you to everybody for listening to us, and we'll be back to you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mick.